I've been aware of Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials books since the late 90s. I've known Christians of various denominations that described them as atheistic, even Luciferian on occasion, and one evangelical atheist who very much liked that a story about killing God was so popular. But a story about a teenage girl against a corrupt church didn't hold much interest for me at the time. It wasn't until 2019, when the BBC adapted it into a series, that I paid it much attention, and I must say both that it was worth the time and that neither of those interpretations is quite right. I'll be looking at that adaptation here, but the core ideas carry through the books. So, quick setup. Lyra Balakwa is an orphan living at Oxford University. Some kind of benevolent child labor thing, apparently. Her uncle, so he claims, Lord Asriel, comes to visit her from time to time. Yeah, the cat. In that world, everyone has a demon, a piece of their soul that takes on animal form, so everyone is walking around with their critter companions all the time. Asriel has a major beef with the magisterium, sort of a combo of the church and an authoritarian state. Most of the people working for the magisterium have snakes, spiders, things like that for their demons. They whisper encouragement in their snaky little voices, nudging the officials along. Not subtle. I should mention that the author is, if not strictly speaking an atheist, is at least an outspoken critic of organized religion, which contributes hugely to these books being attacked as anti-Christian. I think something a lot more interesting is going on here, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. For now, just know that Asriel is studying some invisible something called dust, which the magisterium thinks is sin. Sort of like the idea of original sin coupled with the Jain idea of karma, something that accumulates on you as you live. Asriel is actually Lyra's dad, and when he flees Oxford with the magisterium in pursuit, Lyra is taken in by Marissa Coulter, a rather stern magisterium loyalist with a creepy little monkey demon. Marissa is actually her mother. You should be starting to get Chosen One vibes about Lyra about now. This is the spoiler warning part. If you haven't seen it or read the books, check out the 3 seasons and come back. Know that I am going to give away the ending in a bit. So this first part revolves around Lyra learning some hard truths, starting with the revelation that she's not an orphan. Her parents are very much alive. They're just busy with other things. More important things. Inconvenient child is inconvenient. There's a lot of intrigue, people getting bumped off, kids disappearing, including Lyra's best friend Roger. It turns out he, along with a bunch of other kids, have been taken to a research facility way up north where experiments are being done to sever their demons from them and thus save them from dust. Sin. But it just zombifies them because their souls have been cut away. Naturally, like good little ideologically trapped minions, they keep doing the same thing, expecting it to work this time. Lyra makes her way up there and almost gets subjected to the process herself, but her mother, who is in charge of the whole thing, runs in and stops it at the last minute. Because while the depraved ghouls always advocate things for your kids, watch how they act very differently with regards to their own.
I never meant to harm you. You must have been able to see that.
No harm. Then what are you doing here?
Nothing to you.
Lyra escapes from Mum, has some adventures involving talking polar bears, and eventually makes it to Asriel's lab way up in the mountains. See, he's fighting the magisterium, these zealots that are killing kids, essentially sacrificing them in pursuit of a religious doctrine masquerading as science. Kinda makes Asriel seem like the good guy here. Until he uses similar technology to sacrifice Roger in order to open a portal to a parallel world. It's always the same. The powerful fight their wars, sacrificing the young in pursuit of their high ideals and grand objectives. So ends Season 1. Going forward, it constantly asks whether the ends justify the means, and it doesn't preach an answer to that question. Asriel is not a good dude. The whole child sacrifice thing is a rather effective shorthand for that disconnect from basic humanity. But we gradually learn what he is fighting, what the stakes are.
He will lead a permanent inquisition into every world, on every being, until they understand complete obedience. And with it, we will bring an end to the freedom of thought and will have controlled dust once and for all.
Everyone, everywhere, being reduced to obedient drones. Slaves. for all time. We rightly should be appalled at Asriel's methods, but we can't honestly say he's in the wrong with his motives. There's a lot to engage with here for a story aimed at kids. It's also one of the ways that it's often described as anti-Christian, anti-any religion. Not only is he trying to bring down the magisterium, topple the church, but he's trying to depose the supernatural being that they call the authority. He's trying to oust God. Only the authority isn't God, isn't the creator at all. Let's take a brief detour into Christian Gnosticism, the simple version, wide open to theological debate. In the beginning, God existed alone, surrounded by the raw waters of creation. God, the Father, stared into them and created Barbello, the Mother. From them came more divine beings, representing aspects of consciousness, truth, mind, will, love, on and on. One of these beings, Sophia, wisdom, really wanted a baby, wanted to bring a new being into the universe. But she wanted to do this on her own, and so she auto-conceived a being that would become, according to the Gnostics, the God of the Old Testament, the Demiurge, who created the material world that we live in. But it's a corrupt and twisted mess because it reflects that being created outside of the natural order of things and without the blessing of God. The role of Christ, then, was to awaken us to the truth of what we are. Children of the divine God, not of the Demiurge who seeks to control us and keep us trapped in his wicked bullshit world. That's kind of the framework that Dark Materials happens within. The Magisterium ruthlessly enforces the mandates of the authority, but the authority is a false god. It claims to have created the angels, but it's just the first angel to coalesce from dust. A lying fraud. And the authority isn't even the fraud in power at the time of this story. He kept delegating tasks to his right hand, the Metatron, an angel who had once been a mortal man. And in time he seized power. One false god deposed and imprisoned by another. I should note that the story doesn't actually address whether God, a true creator, exists at all, only that the corrupt entities claiming to be the authority are illegitimate and unworthy of obedience. Dust itself seems to be the real creative force, sort of the universe conscious of itself. This Demiurge is trying to separate humanity from that. And so, while Philip Pullman is definitely not really writing a Christian story that everyone missed, he's not a mirror universe C.S. Lewis either. He's setting up a corrupt and illegitimate authority that rules through fear and deception and setting his characters on a path to break free of it. To read the story and map that directly onto the Christian God maybe says as much about the reader as the author, but then I'm a bit of a heathen myself. Both sides of this fight are objectively reprehensible. Both literally sacrifice children to their cause, though the forces of the authority are far more prolific in that regard. And while that subject is rather on the nose these days, the BBC production does something kind of subtle that really caught my eye. Let's talk about guns for a minute. So the Magisterium has a military force, and being the bad guys, they're almost comically equipped with Nazi-era guns, MP40s, K98Ks, and this is consistent with a few minor exceptions, like one sniper with a Russian Mosin Nagant. I do appreciate that they didn't just lazily ape Nazis. The Magisterium soldiers lean a bit more into Italian fascism with their design, even directly calling back to a famous photo of Mussolini at one point. But Asriel's firearm choices tell their own little story. At the end of Season 1, after he opens the rift to another world, he's carrying a Lee Enfield. It makes perfect sense. He's British and his entire world is at a roughly 1940s level overall. An iconic and smooth-operating British bolt action fits the character. When we see him at the start of Season 3, he's carrying an AK, some kind of 74 SU model, a Soviet block gun. He's the only one that has this, and the choice speaks to his character's arc. Like Lenin, Asriel isn't really wrong about identifying the immediate source of the people's oppression. He commits horrific acts in pursuit of a greater good, atrocities he justified as weighed against the greater evil. Asriel is an asshole, but he's not really wrong in terms of who the enemy is. And of course, his post-revolution plan is optimistic and vague.
And together we could build a republic of heaven above. and a republic of ideas below. Worlds in which the scars of history may be healed.
This monster preaching justice, equipping himself with Soviet equipment, is right in line. Later, he wears a Czech VZ-23 on his hip, another comm-block gun. Some of the fighters in his army carry comm-block weapons too, Pepeshas and Mosins, though Cold War-era NATO rifles are the most common with them, in contrast to the Magisterium's mostly World War II arsenal. A lot of G3s in particular in the hands of the revolutionaries. A more progressive and diverse armament selection in multiple ways. I'm probably reading too much into it, though I like to think the choices were made for thematic reasons. On a related note, I've heard many musings on why the name Asriel was chosen, ranging from being a reference to the angel of death in Islamic tradition, a biblical reference to something in Chronicles I didn't read, even attributing significance to its spelling in the text being an anagram of Israel, which there's a stinging joke in there, but it always makes me think of Gargamel's cat. On one level, the whole thing can be taken as humanism versus religion, but not quite. Because Asriel and the people he gathers in his cause aren't fighting alone. There are rebel angels fighting alongside them. Obvious Lucifer parallels here. And the story goes even further, explicitly referencing the serpent that must guide Lyra into, well, quite directly into temptation of the flesh, among other things. That role is fulfilled by Mary, an Oxford physicist who ends up on a quest. She was formerly a nun, but lost her faith.
There was no one there to reward me for being a good girl, or no one there to punish me for being wicked. It was liberating.
This story again calls back to Gnostic traditions, with the serpent not as a corrupter, but the conduit of knowledge. As part of that role, she facilitates Lyra and her questing companion, Will, coming together as lovers and thereby drawing dust to themselves, rather than letting it keep seeping out through the gaps between worlds. I'm not talking much about Will Perry in this. His is a good story, but I'm on the big themes mode here. Which brings us to the prison of the soul. The walls and darkness that false gods, metaphorical or literal, trap us within. Lyra journeys into the underworld to save the soul of her friend Roger. And the afterlife is a shithole. Dark, dreary, and overseen by these harpies that dredge up all the misery and self-doubt of anyone that thinks that maybe they can make things better, reducing them all to obedient, shuffling clods afraid to raise their voice. And this is by design. The Authority crafted this prison for the souls of the dead. Lyra, with her companion Will and the help of several secondary characters, most notably Lee Scoresby, played in this instance by Lin-Manuel Miranda, lead the people out into the true next world where their souls can move on. Leaving the portal open, the Harpies will now guide the newly deceased through the darkness to it in exchange for them telling the stories of their lives. True stories, so presumably there are no politicians in heaven. Passage through a dark purgatory, confronted by guides, judges, recounting your life and your truthfulness weighed before being led to the next place. This echoes many different mythologies. But crossing into the land of the dead without actually dying takes some effort. Now, usually I find any depiction of the afterlife that involves bureaucracy and standing in queues to be incredibly tedious and unimaginative. And I don't give this one a pass for that, but at least the pre-purgatory element of it serves a purpose. It establishes that even in death, there are still arbitrary rules being imposed. Not a bad metaphor for religious-based social control mechanisms. But most importantly, no one can cross over the river with their demon at their side. Lyra has to leave the little critter, has to leave that piece of her soul behind. Everyone does. Not being able to see your demon doesn't mean you don't have one. Their journey through the underworld comes at a high cost, and when they emerge back into the light, they are missing some vital part of themselves. It takes time and effort to get it back. In this case, to literally find their demons and reconnect with them. But it's a good metaphor for any kind of traumatic experience, from personal loss to war. It takes a lot from you. You'll never be the same, but you can come back from it. While all this is happening, Lyra's parents, these two extremes lost in their own ideology and self-importance, kind of balance out to bring down the usurper. quite literally in this case. The shallow read is that they tackled God, which is hilariously bad, but it ends up being a decent redemption arc for them. Not an all is forgiven arc, they've done some unforgivable shit, but they both step up, take responsibility, and sacrifice themselves in an act of atonement that frees everyone else. The false god is gone, vaporized, the magisterium and its equivalents across countless worlds shorn of power, and the souls of everyone are free to pass on instead of being stuck in a dreary eternal purgatory. Almost as an afterthought, this block is dropped into the story. They cut it open, and inside is the authority, that angel that had claimed to be the creator only to be overthrown by his minion. Exposed, he too turns to dust and blows away on the wind. I've seen criticisms that this is too understated, not adequately explained. I think that's kind of the point, having the authority dissolve in a brief little throwaway scene. He hasn't been relevant in a very long time, and no one else even notices his passing. But there's no happily ever after. Lyra and Will are from different worlds, and to their own they must return, never to meet again. Life isn't always fair, kiddos. This isn't the end of their story, but that's another story that I haven't read yet. Perhaps we'll get there in time. But finally, there's one more thing I want to cover here. That damn monkey. When first introduced, it's a nasty little thing. But as the story progresses and we learn more about Marissa, that starts to change. It's notable that unlike most demons, this one doesn't talk. It's a silent companion, sometimes an embodiment of malice, but other times there's a weight of regret in its face. In the second season, we learn that Marissa can suppress that part of herself, separate from it both in distance and spiritual connection. It's part of how she can be so cold and detached, and it proves to be vital to the eventual victory. But her demon takes on some air of an unwanted and neglected child. There's a kinship between it and Lyra. And in the end, while Marissa is falling into the abyss with Asriel and the Metatron, the monkey is back in the base, ready to activate a bomb that will end the Metatron's works, dissipate his fortress, and bring peace to all of the many worlds. While most demons are companions, following the lead of their humans, this one acts. Its self-sacrifice is equal to hers. They are one soul, but both pieces make a choice. It's kind of remarkable that a CGI character with no lines can provoke emotional responses ranging from wanting to punt it off a balcony at the start to a real sense of empathy with it at the end. So, is it blasphemous atheist propaganda, or is it a story of growing up, taking responsibility, and finding a source of morality within instead of from mere fear of punishment? I suppose it depends on your assumptions. For me, it's a story about seeking truth even if you don't like where it leads. A story about weighing the needs of others against your own and trying to do good for others without becoming a servant or a master. Not so much anti-religion as anti-dogma. The idea that truth can be dictated rather than discovered. All I can say is that if I had kids, I would watch this with them. And the whole dust thing kind of reminds me, one of these days is a tangent to something or other. We're going to be talking about vril and loosh and all kind of weird shit.